So question number 5 is actually one of my favorite concepts in physics, and it has to deal with the conservation of momentum. So basically, the most difficult part of momentum questions, we know that momentum, P, is equal to mass times velocity, and here I drew up for you the conservation of momentum. The hardest part in differentiating problems like this is determining the difference between an inelastic and an elastic collision. An inelastic collision is where two objects ultimately end up together, or they're initially together and they break apart. An elastic collision is when you can either take a bouncy ball and throw it against a wall and it comes back to you, or when you have two objects that run into each other and then they bounce off, and you can find their velocities or you can find their masses. So, question 5 represents an inelastic collision, and it says, Joe is standing on a canoe that has a mass of 40 kilograms. So, call it canoe with mass equals 40 kilograms. The canoe is at rest on the surface of a smooth lake. Joe jumps off the canoe with a speed of 5 meters per second. And Joe has a mass of 80 kilograms. What is the velocity of the recoil of the canoe after he jumps? So Joe is 80 kilograms. So, in order to see that, determine the difference between inelastic and elastic, well, Joe and the canoe are initially together, and then after Joe is here, he traveled some direction to the right, and the canoe traveled some direction to the left. So, normally when we go ahead and solve this, we say that the final velocities are equal to one another. But in this case, both Joe and the canoe had an initial velocity of 0. So, in this part of our equation, we can go ahead and call Joe mass 1 and the canoe mass 2. So, both of them had velocities of 0 meters per second. So when we go to solve this equation, 0 is equal to m1 v1 final plus m2 v2 final. So we know that it needs to equal 0. And this is where he gets the recoil problem, kind of like a gun shooting a bullet out and the gun going backwards. So, if Joe is mass 1, and he weighs 80 kilograms, and he jumps to the right at positive 5 meters per second, and the canoe weighs 40 kilograms, then we can go ahead and find final velocity of the canoe. So, 80 times 5 is 400. We can go ahead and move that to the other side. Negative 400 kilograms times meters per second is equal to 40 kilograms times the final velocity of the canoe. And if we divide by 40, we get that the final velocity of the canoe is equal to negative 10 meters per second. The reason this is negative is because if Joe jumps to the right and the canoe goes to the left, Joe is positive and the canoe is negative. The answer choices are all positive in this case, so it should be asking what is the speed of the canoe. So the answer choice for this is answer choice 1 with a speed of 10 meters per second.